I am very happy to introduce Cathy Garner, who is a relationship coach, TEDx speaker, and creator of Vision Portraits and Relationship Skills program. Cathy speaks to bring hope to those who may have lost faith in love and passion for their life's purpose. With 3 decades experience of leadership, organizational, and personal development internationally, and at some of the UK's top universities, Cathy coaches people to express their life's dreams and visions, and speaks on how we can use the science of love to transform our personal and professional relationships. Her mission and legacy is to equip a generation to love well and live with purpose.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your beautiful introduction, Perdita. And it's so gorgeous to meet you. It's so gorgeous to meet each of you. And I know that this topic of leaving a legacy is not going to be new to you. It's going to be something that you will have been thinking about, perhaps your whole life, perhaps unconsciously, aware every day that what we do each and every day outlives us in some way. And so it's an important topic, and I want to share with you 3 things really. I want to start by talking a little bit about my story, how my vision has led to the legacy that I hope to leave. And then I'd like to take you through an exercise to help you glimpse your legacy as if it had already come to pass. So I hope what that exercise will do is help you to unlock any of those hidden barriers that may be holding you back from doing the thing you really want to be doing right now. And lastly, if time allows, I'd like to introduce you to a formula, which I think will be maybe a new way slightly of looking at legacy. So I want this session to be about you. As I'm talking, what I'd love you to do is just take notes, think for yourselves, think whatever comes up for you. Ask yourselves questions, and I'll ask you some questions as we go along as well, so that you can reflect on yourself. I want you to use this time for you, your business, your life, your legacy. So legacy, what is legacy? I asked my daughter this question as I explained that legacy is what connects us in our little lives to future lives. And I'd like to ask you, what are the first words? What are the first thoughts? Who springs to mind, perhaps, when I say the word legacy? Who do you benefit from? Whose legacy do you benefit from? Because when I asked my daughter this question, the first word that came out was boring, which I guess is probably the right answer when you're 7. You may find yourself thinking about money, about property, that's one of the things that came up. In fact, that's what my husband said when I asked him at breakfast what legacy meant. So what is this thing about legacy for soul-centered, heart-centered entrepreneurs? So we've got women coming up, artists, writers, poets, grandmothers. Oh my goodness, I'll share a story about my grandmother. She lived to almost 100. She was 99 and a half. And when she died, we found her diaries. And written in one page in the 1930s, she described this tall, handsome, articulate man in her local amateur dramatic society. And that man went on to become my granddad. Now, I work in relationships, as you know, and as we were looking at her diary, we saw scrawled in the margin just 3 little words. I wonder why. So one of the things that I've done in my life is to learn from my grand's regret. She had a painful 50-year-long relationship with a rather austere and distant man. And I think that if they had known what I know now, their relationship, their life, and their legacy, my grandparents would have been very, very different. But Gran outlived Grandad for about 20 years and was very happy and very vivacious, and she ran women's groups and she did all sorts of wonderful things. So I'm just going to share with you some of the people who have influenced me, as well as my own Gran. Some of the people who may have inspired you, may be the same as some of the people whose legacies have inspired me, and their reflections on what it is we do that makes a difference. This was one of the first people who inspired me as a youngster, as a child. I was given her biography in my teens, and I discovered that she was a humanitarian worker. And this was her greatest legacy. We see the films, but Hollywood and Bollywood have a lot to answer for, as I'm sure you know. And Gandhi, whatever you do will seem insignificant to you, but it is most important that you do it. Now, Gandhi has been an inspiration for me, and some of what he said and some of what he did didn't make sense to me. And so I set out in 2005 in Gandhi's footsteps and walked 240 miles across rural Gujarat with 600 people. And we were following the trail of the original Salt March, which was when India became, or kind of shook the British Empire's hold on India. And started this real campaign for independence. It really took hold. And we had people, as you can see in the bottom left there, who were Gandhi lookalikes in the party. And we also had people watching from the sidelines. In some towns and villages, hundreds of people came out and queued along the sides of the road. And some of these people, villagers like the ones in the picture here, Gandhi referred to as Harijan, children of God. They're now referred to as the scheduled caste. What that means is that they are seen as less than other people. They are usually given only certain kinds of jobs, low income jobs that no one else will do. And as we were walking and stopping in these villages, I began drawing pictures, portraits face to face with people who were living really just under stretched out blue tarpaulin, their children running in the streets. And I began drawing pictures of them, and the gift that was exchanged during that time, drawing pictures, drawing portraits, was incredible, because it felt very much that I was receiving a welcome and an honour from them as a foreigner that was very rare. And they were receiving from me just the gift of being seen, because most people, most other Indians outside of their group would not be looking at them, would not be spending time with them. In fact, I was told not to. So this was a really extraordinary experience for me, and it was powerful in shaping my idea of what's important in my life. And so I set out a year later. I left my job. I was the head of staff development at Bristol University. I've been leadership and management development advisor there for a long time, a coach from 2001. I think it's hard to believe, isn't it, all those years. And I set out with this motto: earn less, live more. And that's what I did. And these extraordinary women in women's self-help groups in rural Tamil Nadu began teaching me how to be an entrepreneur, how to be someone who made things happen and who left a legacy. And I returned from this visit, having met these women. These women had fought some very powerful local developers who were dredging the pond in their village. They were dredging it for sand. They wanted building materials. And these women had stood up to those developers, and they'd been taken to the police cells. So we've got dozens of women now in the police cells in this tiny little village in rural Tamil Nadu, and they wouldn't leave. They wouldn't go home. And they wouldn't go home until the police had taken charge of the situation and they'd won their fight. And so what I saw in these remarkable women was something I hadn't seen back home. It was this idea that you cannot fail. If you are determined, you cannot fail. They had no precedent because they'd really only been liberated themselves very recently. They'd only been taught the skills of meeting and creating their own future by these local groups, local Indian charities working, creating self-help groups. There are hundreds of thousands of these groups in rural India, and they had no precedent for failure. They had an open sky above them. They had no concept that we might try and then not succeed. And I think what we do in the West perhaps is that we often dumb ourselves down a little, or we limit ourselves, or we look at what other people have achieved or haven't achieved. And perhaps we don't have this idea that we could do whatever we are called to do. And that's what these women taught me. And I went home, I began drawing portraits of women. And this was the very first series of portraits I drew, which was of this remarkable healer, a woman called Judith. And this was as I was creating this concept of vision portraits. It's like a vision board, but you do it in words. So you start to speak out your vision, your dreams, your aspirations, the things you really long for. And she really longed to make her business flourish. And as she began talking, this vision expanded and expanded beyond her business, beyond that small, limited vision to the whole of her life. And it included her children, it included her partner, it included nature, it included all the things that were important to her. And so I drew more portraits. Some were legacy portraits, like this one of my dad. I think you can probably see the words more clearly here. If you look in the chin, you can see empathy, integrity, wisdom. And those were the qualities that my dad left me. He died 12 years ago. And I sobbed my way through this portrait. I cried as I wrote these words, my memories of my dad. But it reminds me, as I look at it, of what's important, or what was important to him growing up, and what's been left to me to carry forward. And I began working with other people. So Nancy Rayner, a famous artist in Santa Fe, who paints these magnificent seascapes. And her vision, which was expansive, growing her business, but also it trickled over into her relationships. And I began drawing relationship portraits, helping couples to talk to each other about their dreams and their aspirations. They would sit on my sofa and talk about things that they'd never heard each other say before. So he's saying, he wants to be in leadership, and he wants to achieve things that she'd never heard him talk about before. And 3 months after he received this portrait, he was headhunted to a higher position, and within that year he had 3 promotions, which he puts down to seeing the word leadership in his eyebrows. She had a transformative experience as well, just being able to claim what she loved to do most, which was building her family life. And as she relaxed into that, she just became more confident in all areas of her life. So they're beautiful stories of how seeing your vision reflected back in your eyes can change things for you. And here's a legacy of another couple who did amazing work with their daughter, with their extended family in rural Uganda. And I began to look at this idea of love and explore it, thinking of my grand's regret, thinking of my own regret, divorced at 27 after a 6-7 year marriage. And I delivered my TED talk on this topic of love not being fated, but something that we create. So is love a legacy for you? What are those qualities? If I were to ask you, what are the values? What are the qualities that are important to you as you think about leaving a legacy? What would they be? And I set out to draw my way of really sharing my legacy through relationship skills. And it begins with this sound hull of friendship. The friendship is what keeps our relationship afloat through all the storms of life. And once you've got this sound hull of friendship, then you hoist the sails. You catch the wind of emotion. Do we know how to deal with the emotions that propel us forward in our life? Are we dealing sensitively and skillfully with those emotions? And the third part of the relationship model is climbing up into the crow's nest and catching a glimpse of our happily ever island, getting a sense of that purpose we have for our relationship, and then using our ship's wheel to navigate towards that purpose and away from the icebergs, which are the 4 relationship killers. So this is now what I teach, and you'll see at the top we've got the word purpose. It's about the purpose we have in our lives. And if we've got this one of the 3 things missing in any of our relationships, what is the purpose of that relationship? What is our purpose? Then we're missing a trick. We're missing the thing that really holds that relationship together and creates something really strong. So this is based on 40 years of research, but it looks kind of pretty and very, very simple. And that's the great thing. We can learn this stuff really easily. So I would like to take you through a process now of just thinking about your legacy. And instead of thinking about it from here into the future, I'd like you to think about leaping forward to the future and having a memory that goes back over your whole life to today. So if you wish, close your eyes, because sometimes it can help to really go into that space, that safe space that is just your own. And with your eyes closed, I'd like you just to imagine yourself. You've just celebrated your 100th birthday. You're happy, you're healthy, you've had a beautiful life, and you're surrounded by the people and the things that you love most. And as you're there, surrounded by all that you love, I'd like you just to listen. What do you hear? What do you see? How are the people's lives around you just a little bit different, maybe a little bit better, because of the legacy that you've been leaving every day of your wonderful 100 years? And what do you hear being said about the work that you began all those years ago? The business that you ran, the people whose lives you touched, the small acts of kindness and compassion, the quality of what you delivered for people. And imagine this time off in the future, where everything that's important to you has already come to fruition. What do you see and hear and feel as you look back over your wonderfully fulfilling life? And just take a moment for those thoughts to sink down. Before we go a little bit further forward into the future. And I want to ask you now to imagine a time when the children of today are elderly. And the things that you've done today have outlived you. And what are those things? What are the ripple effects of the love that you've shown? What are the ripple effects of the businesses that you've built? What are the ripple effects of all the lives you've touched? And if you can imagine that now, just notice, what do you see in that distant future? You're there now, looking back over generations. What do you notice? What do you feel? And when you're ready, come back to today, bringing with you all those observations, all those insights, all those blessings that you've seen in the future. And maybe just take a minute to jot down words, ideas, thoughts, essences, feelings that you had in that space, in that time, far in the future. So take a little moment, and I'll just chat as you're jotting down those thoughts. But do take some time after we've finished as well to just go back into that place and jot down what that meant to you. Okay, so this is the formula that I wanted to share with you. Now, hazard a guess. What are those letters going to be? What's your L? That's an easy one. We have vision equals your legacy. Now, this is my take. So this is not based on 40 years of longitudinal studies like this stuff. This is my very emerging idea from what I've seen as I've created portraits for people. So I worked with a woman who had been single for she'd been single longer than that. She hadn't even been on a date for 6 years. She came to me, we worked on her relationship skills for a few months, but she still wouldn't date. All of her relationships were transforming, her relationship with her mum, with her colleagues. She was having a brilliant time. But she came to me for a relationship and she wasn't dating. And so I drew her portrait. Well, she actually created a vision board and she spoke me through it. And she talked about the mother she wanted to be, the wife she wanted to be, the home she wanted to live in, and all of this stuff. I drew it into her face, and within 3 days of receiving her portrait, she started dating. And she carried on dating until she fell in love and he fell in love with her. So something happens, I think, when we see our vision in front of our face. Something happens that transforms our idea of who we are. I believe that it's very hard for us to fulfill our vision if our identity of ourselves isn't equal to that vision. Your vision plus your identity needs to match so that you can actually fulfill that vision. Because quite often we dream big, and this goes back to that question you had before. We dream so big, and yet our day-to-day identity, the woman we see when we look in the mirror, isn't the woman who's going to fulfill that vision. So what do we need to do? Well, there's all sorts of wonderful things we can do. And you work in some of these areas. You develop people, you heal people, you restore people's faith in themselves, in their businesses, by creating websites, by working with parents. All of these things actually have an impact on our identity. Who are we? Who are we when we look in the mirror? And so when you take your vision and you write it into the lines and shadows of your face, then you see, looking back at you, someone who is slightly different perhaps than the person you were when you started to think about that vision. Because our face is the greatest symbol, isn't it, of our identity. If we can see our face looking back at us with that vision, it becomes much easier to fulfill that vision. And this is what I found as I drew this portrait. I was stuck in my relationship. I'd written the workbooks, I'd run courses, I knew what I had to do. If I wanted to, I could have coloured in the lines, I could have used these skills, but I didn't want to. I was angry, I was hard, I was resistant, I was not a happy lover, wife, mother. I was stuck. And I sobbed my way through this portrait. I don't even know actually what I was so upset about now. My memory's completely gone about that. But I do remember crying my way through this portrait, writing who I wanted to be, the lover, the mother, the gratitude I wanted to have, the joy I wanted in my relationship and in my work life and in my home life. And the next time I saw my partner, I was softer, I was different, my identity had changed. And I was able to share with him how I felt. And he was really able to be there for me. So this is one brilliant way of becoming unstuck. Another way that's great is sticking your vision on Post-it notes and sticking them around the edge, the peripheral vision on your mirror. Because when you see your face and those words, your unconscious mind begins to attach those words in present tense to who you are. Your identity is crucial to fulfilling your vision and leaving your legacy. In other words, be the change you wish to see in the world. So you may never know what results come from your actions, but if you do nothing, there will be no results. And so when we get stuck, this is what we remember. Just one little thing, do little actions in line with that vision, in line with the identity that we want to be. And wonderful things can happen. So now in my business, I support a little village in rural Tamil Nadu called Rampura, and that means that all the children there get to go to school. We do rainwater harvesting, tree planting projects, all sorts of wonderful things. And I want that to grow. I want that to be part of the legacy that I leave. And we're all ships, we're all relationships. Every part of our legacy is probably connected to relationships. So what are the ships in your life? What are the relationships that you need to work on to become more skillful at as we kind of sail into our future together? Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here, and thank you for giving time to thinking about your legacy and what you want to leave.